Well, hello, creatives community, kind folks out there as well. And this is RPG with DBJ. This week we are talking about transhumanism, the transhuman condition, the far future, and the things that are related to it, and how we can use some of those elements from transhuman philosophy in our tabletop RPG games. Now, you don't necessarily need to be a fan of science fiction at all, but we are going to talk about some of the main touchstones, some of the ideals, both good and bad, and everything in between that has to deal with transhumanism, and of course, similarly said things like post-human or human plus, and other descriptors thereof. So yesterday it was Monster Monday, and we kind of delved into immortality and a lot into immorality. And we talked about ethics and morality and how the passage of time can affect how we think of things, and also our perceptions of what is and isn't moral. And essentially we went down that deep path. So of course, because of the nature of this show, we talk about an hour. You can join us, posting your comments on pro or against, or different ideas in the chat YouTube. And of course, you can also join in the Discord. We happen to be in the boiler room down at the bottom. If you slide down the bottom in Fantasy Grounds College, if you join their Discord, of course, you have yourselves individuals who can teach you about Fantasy Grounds and hang out with some of the other students there and the faculty, but we hang down in the boiler room. So if you go down to the left and slide all the way down, that's where we're hanging out there. Now, one of the things that I find amazing about thinking about transhumanism is the idea that it can kind of destroy what we hold dear, even if many of us are on intrinsically opposite ends of a spectrum of various types of beliefs or political ideals or gender politics and those kind of things. One of the ideals of it is that eventually a lot of those things will go away. They'll just fade away in the wind. And related to the thumbnail, there's like edits, copies, and remakes. And in using these kinds of elements, if we are able to transfer our minds, our consciousnesses into other bodies, if we are able to live without a body in a virtual environment or as just pure digital information, what does that say about our lifespan and even about identity? If individuals are able to live without a body, there is no need to hold on to any kind of gender identity at all, which was pointed out by a Rickard yesterday. Like, why have a gender at all? And presuming how in which manner you are raised, you can either pick and choose genders on the fly and just express yourselves in that kind of way. You can pick and choose the kinds of sexual encounters you want, considering that is, especially in virtual reality, just about anything is possible. And also, you don't have to be, some would say that the epitome would be not to have neither an gender identity nor be distracted by sexual proclivities at all. That some feel that the move towards this, the move towards a singularity, the move towards a higher technological advancement or access to things, a ubiquity of equipment and technology and skills, that some people would feel that, being able to turn those things off, turn off your bits and pieces of your emotions, are just nothing but distractions for either a greater good or for a larger project or something. So now when it comes to high technology and transhumanism, I feel like it's strangely enough, Dungeons and Dragons has a lot to do with that as well. There are plenty of magical abilities and things that kind of duplicate those same events, right? We have lots of healing that draw people back from the brink of death, and not very many side effects to that. Now, I understand based on your setting and based on the narrative, it behooves us to add some kind of ramifications for bringing someone back from the dead. But if we were to literally take it at face value, if the gaming statistics, we take it at face value and there really are no ramifications, then all of a sudden now we have a situation where both great and horrible things can be happening. I mean, as far as great things, you know, uh, harm and death become minor nuisances to achieving a goal, right? You could climb a mountain, and if you fall and break your back and suffer all kinds of harm, you just get yourself healed and you go right back up the mountain again until you finish, right? But some would say that the fear would be that there are no risks involved, that physical harm, permanent harm, and death. Yeah, Pilar, like respawn in 3, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yep. It's some have even associated Eclipse Phase as like the respawn game, which in many ways it is, right? And the idea that you can always come back, that you live as digital information and all can always come back, is, while on the surface it does feel like a respawn, the game system actually has ramifications. You can suffer quite a bit of psychological harm by effectively getting into situations where it's really suicide missions and doing it over and over again. It's a very bizarre kind of thing, but some in our society would say that that's extremely harmful for our progression as a society, because if you were to do something, knowing that you're going to do something that may lead to your death, makes the act that you're about to perform that much more impactful to the world. If you're willing to literally put your life on the line to achieve a particular goal, that at least in your own mind, if not in the minds of others, that this thing you're about to do is important. But if you could always come back, it just becomes a nuisance, and then it kind of trivializes maybe your desire to bring about some form of, say, protest or action or something like that. Right. And Rickard says, is it really a suicide mission if you know you'll just be re-sleeved? Exactly. And sure, in our own life, we know that there have been people, I'll bring up, there was a Buddhist monk that to achieve peace lit himself on fire, right? And in our own world, we're just thinking like, oh my God, like, was you really lighting yourself on fire? Jeez. But if that person could just come back again, I mean, is that form of protest, I mean, would it really have that much impact? Does anyone go, oh, well, they'll just be back again? I mean, yeah, it doesn't sound terribly peaceful. Well, if you're doing it to yourself, right? I mean, versus, trying to bring about change by, doing it to other people. And yeah. Ricker says, I mean, at that point, they would protest with destroying their stack. I have a feeling that cortical stacks in that kind of setting are like made out of like some kind of, compressed carbon, diamond, something. It always seems like they survive everything. So I'm presuming that they're like a black box in your head. Dead Man says, in one of the short fictions in Eclipse Phase, there's mention that one main character's child is running a shaper morph, which can change genders in a few days. Yeah, and there's always the idea of either a breed of people or a morph or a shell or something that can change, almost like a succubus or incubus, or a doll morph that can change its gender. Basically, either programmed or people are riding in bodies that can be used for, sexual congress or something. Playing that kind of character as a player character, while it seems enjoyable enough, might tend to go away very quickly. But in a setting, even if you start talking like Dungeons and Dragons or something, in a setting where some characters have access to shape, changing their shape or using illusions to bring about the same thing, uh, could be highly lucrative. And as a matter of fact, based on based on how broadly something is expressed. For example, how long does it take people to learn magic and use like minor illusion or mage hand and all these other types of spell-like effects? Uh, at some point, people might start making money off of that. Like, I can give you all your pleasures. Oh. And bringing up the one of the episodes of Black Mirror where the two gentlemen start having a relationship in the video game, and how it ends, it may even destroy our notions of what gender identity is. So, and our exploration of it, because some would say that the one gentleman that plays the female video game character, one person could claim that, well, he's basically gay, right? He wants to be a female with his friend, but they kind of show, using the episode itself, that when they were together, it was like, no, we don't really have these sparks. So it's very possible for people to explore different. It may be a commonality that people don't identify neither their desires nor their physical gender in any kind of way. It might be so fluid that they just go, this weekend I'm going to try on a blank blank, I'm going to try on this other body. And of course, because those morphs or shells are genetically created, I can imagine there would be a whole industry where there's a huge mix and match of body parts and genitalia, maybe having none or some or multiple versions of such things. Yeah, you can go down some really weird paths, and I'm sure in our own present day that not only would there be at least a small population that would dive into that, you'd have an equally small population that would be protesting against such a thing, because it completely, it is the destruction of what we hold true. Much of transhuman theory is destroying religion, destroying nature, destroying what we've held as true for so long. Rickard says, with enough boom, you could destroy anything. If you can't, you're not using enough boom. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, there's everything could be every problem can be fixed with just a little bit more boom. Rickard goes on to say, the easier it is to change your shell, the less the body means. But I would also imagine that so would reproduction. And again, the idea of reproduction is often sidelined in games, including Eclipse Phase, which does a deep dive into this kind of thought. But reproduction itself basically not only just becomes a choice, but it becomes a choice of when, how, what kind of child, which one, whether you're a single parent, you're in a you're a pair of parents of any type, whether you're in a constellation or polygamous relationship or something of that nature, hiring or buying or having your AI help raise your child, and using VR or sleep teaching, or even although in eclipse phase they make it's kind of a mistake. You could even advance grow a child, and you know what happens when people can choose the exact nature of reproduction. You know, when you can take 5 people and combine their DNA to create a child, when you can pre-program teaching lessons or have an AI who is able, which is able to adjust its teaching lessons to raise a child in a specific manner. When is the child's when do you take away agencies from the child or never allow the agency to be given to the person being raised? Rickard even says, would we have children if we go into the cybernetic direction rather than custom biosleeves? Which brings us back to uh, remakes, sleeves, edits. I'm sure there would be plenty of people who would, instead of raising an independent individual, they may make copies of themselves, or at least find a baseline of their own personality, almost the framework, the foundation of who you are, minus the education, the knowledge, and start raising themselves, almost as if to raise yourself so that a copy of yourself could be raised in a more idealistic setting, right? If we could all go back and redo our lives, would we? And that's an age-old question. You know, it's the wish, it's the, can I go back in time? And without time travel, I think a lot of people would even choose to relive their lives if they could have another shot at it. And that's one way of literally putting your personality into a child and randomly and start to raise your child, erasing the randomization of it. Deadman says Eclipse Phase does discuss resleeving while still alive, and people having resleeving parties. Yes, where you know it's the idea of, and having a resleeve party. Like, what kind of party is it? Is it a celebration of one individual that may have, quote unquote, died in a car crash, and they're like, oh, you know, couple hours later, glad you're back, and like, ooh, I like this new sleeve. I wasn't thinking about this sleeve, but yeah. Or, you know, going to their best friend, like, well, now I know you were really into the opposite sex, and now that I'm opposite sex, let's hook up, you know, that kind of thing. Or it could be a enclave of individuals who've gotten together to re-sleeve, which could be an oddity of itself. Maybe people move to an aquatic world, maybe moving to the deep oceans of Europa, and everyone gets together and it's like, are we all going to re-sleeve at the same time? Yeah, let's go on vacation. You know, well, with a vacation lasting maybe 60 years before they come back, and you know, it very much could be that way. You know, depending on how easy it is for people to obtain new sleeves, how much money they earn, the companies that grow them and make them, how reliable they are to get stuff. Yeah. Pelora says randomly generated children copy and paste the file into a new body. Not. I think it wouldn't be too far from that. I mean, how many parents wish their children had certain personality traits, and if neurologically we're advanced enough to be able to map the mind, you could say, listen, I want my kid to be a lawyer and need less sleep. I want them to have a desire for physical activity and a motivation to work very hard to achieve great things. And they go, well, we can't really program that, but we do have the lack of sleep thing. And let's see, lawyer. How about a great memory? Sure, we'll paste that up in there in that kid. You know, and then, you know, it's a strange thing to say that a child has no agency, but essentially they don't until they start to grow. And so, but how much genetically, by changing them as a child, how much are we taking that away from them as an adult? You know, that kid raised as a lawyer might be like, I would have loved to been a painter. That would have been nice, but thanks, parents, for taking that away from me. You know, or you know, the person becomes an adult and is like, are you telling me you could have made me a painter? Because I see other people being painters, and while I'm terrible at it, I would have loved to have been some kind of fine artist or something. You know. Zevran says, quote, I want a kid, but don't want to deal with it. Can you like fast forward it about 10 years old? Yes. There's a little bit of the laziness too. Like, yeah, I don't really feel like cleaning them. So could you just let them sit in the pod till they're like 10 or 12? Because I'd like to get past those nasty parts. I've seen in the Tritio images that I've looked at that's pretty much a nasty part. Oh yeah, and after they get 10, I'll keep them from 10 to 12. Can you stick them back in the pod and fast forward past like those nasty teenage years? Which I don't know. Can you stick a live person back in the pod and fast forward their aging? Especially if they're a child. I don't know. That might be an option. I just thought about that, but ooh, nasty. Ricker says when we are functionally immortal and no longer a slave to our biological needs, is there a drive for offspring? I think our concept of offspring might change in terms of would you consider a copy of yourself, whether no matter how high the fidelity of your copy, would that be considered offspring? If you could rewind or edit away parts of your own copies of yourself back to an age at which, like, man, I wish I could relive my teenage years. I'm going to delete my brain down to my teenage self and then let that live on its own, or just make a copy of yourself. Because hey, you know what? I've always wanted to explore these 6 different worlds. So I'm going to make 5 copies of my personality, all go out to 6 different worlds, and we're going to come back to one location and then reconstitute our personalities back together again. Almost like going on like 6 different vacations, then coming back and then having all 6 memories of those 6 different vacations back into one brain. That's a possibility as well. And that might be a new way of quote unquote thinking of offspring. But I do agree, if once we are functionally immortal, the idea of raising children probably fades. There's a good chance that a large population of the people will just fade to the background. Or there are people who are just natural caretakers. I could imagine enclaves of people who are just producing offspring on the norm. Some people might have as many as 200 or 300 offspring, even in the natural sense, right? There's if medical technology and genetic engineering is so good, there may just be people who are just, habitats full of people who are doing nothing but I don't know, maybe meeting random individuals and getting their genetic material so that every child has like a mix of genetic material. That was actually done in the book Red Mars. There's Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. I believe it's Hugo or Nebula Award-winning series. And in that, one of the first 100 colonists, she actually stole the genetic material from the other 99 colonists and went about reproducing from the other colonists she was sent to Mars with, and having one after another child mixed with all of them. So it's kind of weird, but yes. Pillar says, quote, "We're starting a new colony. Let's print out 10 million people to settle it." Yeah, that's another thing. If AI systems are good enough to raise people, why would it be just raising one? You could literally send a seed ship with basically embryos, zygotes, or whatever, just random genetic material, and they could just start pumping out people. And of course, they'll have maybe sleep teaching or implanted memories or things of that nature, or at least the Mars trilogy. Thank you, Dead Man. Yeah, it's a great series. It's a little heavy with the science part of it, but that's why I love the series, because the person who wrote it, it's a little dated for today, but I think the science holds up, and it does a huge deep dive into Mars. I think seed ships and AI could very easily go to other planetary systems, modify the bodies there, and in effect, seed ships could be sending out our own humanity to the point where we will be meeting in the future aliens that are basically ourselves. You're wrong. Zev says, "Oh God, I just thought of children as a loot drop from a video game. If they had bad perks, you blame." Oh, you're so wrong. You can't have kids as a loot drop from a video game. Although, well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you could go into if you went into a like a horror type of situation, and you think there's an abandoned habitat, and you go inside and all the people walking around are dead, or they're gone, or their stacks are down, and then you just see a chamber with pods, and it's nothing but all just filled with kids floating in liquids and stuff. Yeah, pretty nasty. Deadman, the storyteller, says it's what Eclipse Phase did for The Lost, a generation of children who were grown in time accelerated VR. Now, yeah, right. Mind you, we're talking about situations where there are no side effects, but the Lost generation they did try to, in the setting of Eclipse Phase, they did try to accelerate the growth of children, and many of them became psychic masterminds, right? They literally were able to figure out how to like really advance psychic potential, but they as a group they're insane. they literally just went mad, so yeah, they had to stop that process because as want to be, when experiments are done and those experiments turn on the creators, everyone's like, no, we don't need to do this any longer. Rickard said you could just sleeve yourself in a teenage body, but I would imagine that at some point humanity wouldn't have a child stage, as everyone is immortal. You could skip the child stage, although a very deep and dark talking about new sleeves and new morphs or shells. There is a permanent child-sized and shaped shell or morph in Eclipse Phase, because the reason for having the child shell is because of them needing to use less resources, oxygen, food, less sleep, and things of that nature. Although they don't necessarily need to be a child. You could just make a smaller human, or maybe some other kind of like marsupial or something, like a bonobo or chimpanzee, and people could just sleeve into them, or you could just uplift those animals to near or equal human intelligence. But if it's just for lack of materials, oxygen, food, energy, that kind of thing. But the darker side of that is making sleeves that are children can lead to a pretty dark path, right? How many adults would be perfectly fine being inside of a child's body and not letting people know what age they are, or vice versa, like a place that specializes in, where I'm going with this, right? It's the pedophilia conundrum in the future, where how wrong or right is it if you have either individuals who are choosing to be in a child's body to have sexual congress with adults, or people who are prisoners, or people who are raised to permanently be children, or using AI systems that mimic those things, virtual reality. It's just like, oh, sure, this future society might not mind so much, but today you're just like, that's icky. Like, yeah, well, you should, yeah, says definitely not touching pedophilia. Yeah, none of us should, but you get my point, right? There's some, for every good there is, like for example, Rickard's saying like maybe there just would never be, we would just eliminate the childhood stage, right? You could literally live your childhood people could live childhoods in accelerated VR systems, or if they don't even have to live in a VR system, you could just keep kids in pods for 17 years, and then boom, to pop them out, if you're not fast accelerating them. Or you could just have full grown bodies, allow the brain to just be in VR, let it flow around for 18 years, and then pop them into an adult body. Or just because they're digital information, just overclock the system. 10 minutes later, boom, they're an adult, and you pop them out that way. Now, I'm sure, especially if we're creating our own settings, you can do so many things with it. Whereas, for example, if you want to use, let's say, Dungeons and Dragons, if people can go, or at least people's minds can go to a plane where time is accelerated, and then they come back into a body. Well, I mean, that would be easy enough. 3 hours, 18 years later, boom, they're back in a body, and there are no children anymore. Zev says, in Mass Effect, there's a race of rhino or turtle-like creatures called the Krogan, the Krogan, that are basically barbarians. They have powerful regeneration, and were given a sterility plague to control their population. In one of the games, the scientists found a way to deal with this. Was to make adult clones of warriors using their strongest genes of their past warlords. Yeah, and again, we haven't even talked about harvesting the traits we want and getting rid of the traits we don't want. Not too much. We didn't talk about that. And so you could very much make people who are like criminals could make strong but stupid people. Hyper strong but stupid people. Bones laced with carbon fiber, and muscles that are like have the tensile strength of like alloy cables and whatnot, and just making them dumb as a doorknob permanently. I could even imagine some criminals, I don't know, using grow tubes or something that make people, maybe bodyguards or thugs or something, that maybe their lifespan's only 7 years at tops before they start to decompose or something, and they're like, I don't need them to last around forever. Hell, I don't care if they last 3 months. I just need a couple of thugs to get this job done, and then once they get the job done, maybe they just throw their bodies into a recycle or something. Rickard says, quote, if you want me to go into that derelict ship, I need to back up my stack, and don't you dare bring back my stack from that ship. Just re-sleeve the backup. I'll tell you I told you so afterwards. Yeah, one of the hazards, because you're getting rid of what death really means. What happens in eclipse phase and in transhuman ideas is that you may encounter something that could literally corrupt your mind because you are digital information. So making a backup of yourself and keeping your backup separate from your original stack, because your original stack might be going into a mission where it will get corrupted, is a perfectly viable adventure, right? It's perfectly acceptable for the party to say go into yes, another one of those derelict ships, or habitat where you're unable to quite detect if there's any warmth or human bodies or something, and literally go on a suicide. Well, you'd have to recall it a suicide mission. I guess you could say destructive nuisance mission. but you get the point, right? It could be go into the mission knowing you're going to end up getting killed because whatever the other 5 squads went in there and they died too. And then trying to retrieve your own stack or the stacks of others, and then bring back your stack. I mean, as a matter of fact, storytelling wise, it's perfectly viable that you yourself, the PC, might literally only be a copy, and maybe not even a very good copy, of the original individual that made you in the first place. So, and that can be a little hard pill to swallow when it comes to playing in these kind of games where, hey, I made up a backstory and I made up my personality. I've got my skills. I got my character sheet. I'm ready to go. And then the game master ends up telling you, hey, you know what? Remember that backstory you have? Yeah, it was all fake because it was created by somebody else. As a matter of fact, it was created by you. And, oh, by the way, there's like 15 other copies of you spread around, and the big bad, yeah, they're hunting you down to kill you because they are you. So they have all of your skills plus the skills of the other 15 copies of you, and they're better at it than all of you combined. You know what I mean? It, a great story element, except for that player that's like, this sucks, man. How could my backstory be fake? You know, Ricker says, I would think we would just stop having children at some point once we have reached immortality, and slowly but surely everyone will become immortal. That depends on how much that spreads. If it's relegated to the few, like the elite, the few, the rich, the powerful, I could see them doing that. Now, as far when it starts to spread throughout the population, again, I would have a feeling that discounts the people who would love to raise children, right? So it might be a niche kind of thing. Like there might be a faction of people who would do that, maybe as either for what they would consider religious reasons or advancement of humanity. It could be for like what their political position, that if we stop doing these things, much like our historians, right? If we stop doing this thing, we'll lose our ability to do such a thing. Not necessarily archaeologists, but the people, like, for example, there are people who are still trained in making samurai armor, right? There's no need to have that, but there are people who want to keep that around. Child rearing might be relegated to that kind of position where, you know, like blacksmithing or I don't know, raising horses or something, right? It might be relegated to a small group of people who are still doing it while everyone else is just living forever. Even if it means people who are living forever are going through cycles of life, like, oh, every 100 years they reboot themselves, like rebooting your computer or your phone, you know. Yeah, just restart me again and delete some of those extraneous files, and I'll just do this again, right? Pelor says, if I take one atom from me and one atom from you and swap them one for one and keep swapping atoms, at what point do I become you and you become me? That is the question, right? As a matter of fact, there's philosophy that says some of us would think that we aren't ourselves at all because we slough off ourselves, and when we go to sleep, we wake back up, but are we the same person and when we went to sleep? Yeah, that's correct. You are very correct. Like if we keep swapping atoms, at what point do we switch? Are we still the same person? And that is a destruction of self that a lot of people are scared of, which in many ways might be kind of cool. What did you put in here, Plora? Oh yeah. I remember that video. Thank you, Plora, putting that into the Discord chat. Yeah. Welcome to life. That's an old voiced over animated video that I put into the playlist because I really loved it. I'll talk about it in a minute because it actually has something to do with what we're talking about today. Yeah. Yeah. Dead Man says the Eclipse Face has the neotonic morph, a child morph that is for every child with a curiosity and small size to match considered advantages for space-based operations. Yes, the idea being that children are intrinsically smaller, they need less resources, they have a higher level of, like you say, curiosity, healing, bits of agility and endurance, psychological recovery, and needing less oxygen, less food, and their smaller size has less weight as well. And sure, I get it. It's also kind of dark when all you have to do is take a left or right turn and you just go down a dark path with that. So I do agree with you. Yes, they do have those small morphs. And here's another idea, right? Okay, there are people who are using these neotonic morphs, neotenic morphs, but they're adults. So would you shoot one? How do you know the difference? Right? It's kind of dark. I mean, would you have an adult relationship with another person who is an adult who's like, hey, I'm thinking about hanging out in this child morph, and you're just like, yeah, don't touch me. I feel icky. Or it could be a fantasy, right? It's nasty, but yeah, right. Or two consenting adults or multiple consenting adults all decide to have a re-sleeve party and jump into child bodies and then start to have themselves a little bit of an adventure, right? Now, I don't mean sexually. I mean like an adventure, like causing trouble, spray painting, jumping off the top levels in the zero gravity habs and stuff like that. Oh yeah. Ricker says, yeah, that's why I say slowly but surely. I mean, once we reach that stage, what is another 1,000 years for the rest of humanity to follow? Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think initially, I could see it initially, right? Where many of us, a large population of us, are very self-centered. Okay. And once we divorce ourselves from the need to have family, to measure ourselves in terms of success in population centers, I could see child rearing falling off to the point where it's almost non-existent. But again, I think once that population has a couple thousand years to be on its own, I think you're going to have yourself some enclaves that are like, you know what? I kind of miss that part of society. And I think those people would collect together. But that doesn't mean population will stop at zero, especially if people could, and I say people in the most loosest of descriptors, that if you could make copies of yourself, would you? And I think people would. I think people would make copies of themselves if for no other reason that there's enough narcissists in the world that would want to only hang out with themselves because they like themselves that much, and engaging in, Multiplicity, dumb comedy movie, where one copy of a person does hard work, another person copy has a relationship, another copy goes on vacation. Each copy could be doing something else and then coming back together to what's the term? It's not reconstitute. Oh, come on, dead man. Please tell me what that is. The term used in eclipse phase when divergent brains are brought back together and all the memories are brought together. I cannot think of it. It's not reconvene. They call it something, but it's not that we're wrong. It's that the game actually specifically calls it something. But it's like a merging of the brain. Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah, I get. Is that it? I thought it began with something. R-E. I'm not going to look up the book because that's going to take me too long. I'll get top-headed, and I don't want to do that. Yeah. Oh man. Zev says, God, I'd love to have this psych rebooted. See if in this new Caesar show I don't have depression or am more attractive. You know what? You could very well do that. Like someone could make copies of themselves for no other reason than to explore the beneficial and darker portions of their own personality, to see how those portions of their personality develop. And knowing that you are with enough high enough fidelity, you could make the choice. For example, is it merging forks? Yeah, that's right. It's merging the forks. But you could make the decision to copy yourself and say one copy is like, you know what? I'm going to live my life in a very upright, law-abiding manner. And your exact same personality is like, great. I have one personality that's going to live a law-abiding life. My other personality, I've always wanted to be a criminal. I think I'm going to do that. Someone who makes a copy could literally in real time explore various aspects of their own personality just to see what would happen, for good or bad. And that might infringe on the freedoms of everybody else, which is a deadly thing in many ways. Rickard says, to that question, do you put them in the order of the recipient's genome or the donors? Oh, in terms of child rearing and creating new people? I don't know. I mean, why you wouldn't need to? You don't need to take 1, 2, or 3 people and just recopy their genomes. You could always have a stack of insertable genomes from various donors, or maybe just actually artificially created and go, you know what, since we're part of the enclave that loves to raise children, you could maybe they have a historical database of various human traits. Maybe there's like, hey, for these 15 years, let's just raise Southeast Asian children. And then maybe there's another period of time where they're like, you know what, let's just raise Central American children. They had a certain genetic marker during the 17th century. Let's just insert that. Hey, anybody remember Neanderthal? Yeah, let's raise some of those, right? I mean, there's no reason why people would even have to choose the specific genetic makeup of the people that it comes from. So I think yeah, I think so. Oh man, Rickard says Kids on Bikes, the transhumanist version. Oh wow, you could even do like Kids on Bikes or or Tales from the Loop or Things from the Flood, like, because even that game doesn't have death as a real thing. So absolutely. Pelora put in a quote, I guess from a song called Soup by Utopia. Our children born a million colors, raised outside the system we all know, where they learn about the balance and the silence, the essence of our wealth. You'd see it filtered through the trees. I don't know the song, but yeah, I mean, oh, the band is Soup. The song is Utopia. Sorry about that. So I'm not familiar at all, but you know, Rickard kind of makes a point in terms of children currently are our method of becoming immortal. And once we have functional immortality, how do they fall away, and will they fall away? Although it could be that they become, here's a strange thing, that they become far more valuable than ever. Because once people, let's say you take 10,000 people, and 10,000 immortal people, do they just become insular? Is there any more growth? And that's where the idea of editing and remaking comes along, where it could be a cultural thing for people to, after every period of time, say every century, to edit away portions of their personality, because maybe we never forget things, or to remake ourselves, or to pick random memories or personality inserts from, say, an off-the-shelf unit or something, because after 10,000 years, maybe we're just in a state of stasis. You know, there's that one person who's always playing their music too loud. You know, after 1,000 years, maybe we get tired of that. And they're just like, dude, could you just pick another personality trait? Like, pick something else. I don't care. Dance, fine art, something, whatever. Stop playing your music loud. You're like, well, that's what I like to do, man. Yeah, Pelora says, you've probably never heard of it. It was just a thing about lack of families and being raised separately from the parents or a printer that made me think about it. Yeah. Today we think about the horrors of children being raised without a family unit. Much like, oh, I don't know if you guys have seen The Boys on Amazon Prime. The Homelander is a pretty terrible terrible end result of a child raised in a laboratory, right? Um, and much of what we think about in child raising and child rearing is the insertion of our own moral outlook, our beliefs, and such. And no matter how good those beliefs might be, in a transhuman setting, a lot of those, what we hold to be true, our cultural norms might disappear. So yeah. Oh, thank you, Dead Man. Oh, thank you very much for that. I'll look at that right when we stop. You know, another thing about edits and remakes and copies is that we can edit away our own traumas. And so I'm imagining that maybe there's a database of trauma and what we consider today to be um, physical exploration, climbing mountains, swimming, running, uh, strongman contests and things might become more of a psychological exploration. Um, okay, follow me on this. The elimination of death and disease and psychological traumas might be our future entertainment, right? There might be clubs where you can insert paranoia and um, phobias and stresses, mental stresses, and things for no other reason. It might be the equivalent of exercise for the brain, where you can go into a VR world and live in a world in the 13th century England or something, or 17th century India, what have you, and live out a whole life or something, a brutal life. Even you could even there may even be little plugins to suffer from terminal diseases psychologically and then recover from it and go, ooh, wow, I learned a lot from that. All right, time to move on with my life, right? Today, some would say that the act of struggle itself is a character building trait that might disappear if we have functional immortality. And so I could imagine even maybe there's even a black market for it. A whole enclave of millions of people, tens of millions of people living together without any of those problems. And the black market might be, people dealing in little black market chips or downloads or something. Like, I got myself some agoraphobia. You want to try some of that? I haven't tried an agoraphobic before. I am scared of clowns. But I want to trade my fear of clowns for something else. I've had this for 50 years, and I think I've played out every scenario. I mean, that might literally be a thing. Ricker says, in that case, we might just follow the path of the immortal jellyfish or the idea behind the original Alien and just cycle through stages. Yeah. We don't need, if an immortal society doesn't need to be in one form. You could cycle through stages of life. And much, the caterpillar butterfly kind of thing, especially if you've already biologically or mechanically programmed in an eternally cycling morph or shell system. So people live as one thing and then cycle into another thing after a century, and then that brings about its own cycle to cycle into something else. And it might be, you could have celebrations of people that are like, hey, I'm reaching my century year. I'm going to cycle into my chrysalis or something like that. And everyone's like, yay, he's going to be in there a couple of months, but when he comes out, he's going to be a different person. Yay. And I say he because we'll probably have to come up with new pronouns or get rid of the old pronouns or something, which today I think we should. I feel like we should create new pronouns. I don't like the, them, and they. I think we should have something new, because them and they already exists as a descriptor for something. I don't know. I just feel like that we should just make something new. I don't think it's a big deal. We always make up new words. We can make up new words. Pelor says the Cavendish banana went extinct because it was functionally a clone. It got infected with the Panama disease, but with no genetic diversity, it had no immunity. Who's to say a similar thing wouldn't happen to humans if we got to that stage? Oops, got that one wrong. Cavendish is what we have. Michael or Mitchell was the one that got wiped out. It's why banana sweets don't taste like bananas. They taste like gross Michael bananas. Ooh, which is, it's the everything tastes like chicken idea, right? Every meat tastes like chicken, where it is possible for, and you bring up the point of side effects, right? Without genetic diversity, what happens to us? For example, externally, we could eliminate, we are about the process of trying to eliminate many of the diseases and parasites that affect us. We could be doing some people would claim that we are doing ourselves harm by eliminating the outside harmful diseases and parasites and bacteria and viruses, because when we are exposed to new ones, we won't have an immunity against them. And yes, without genetic diversity, that may be a thing, in which case, how do we decide to be genetically diverse? Do we forcibly make people give up some of their genetic material? Will it become a cultural norm that you must give up some of your genetic material? Will there be enclaves that specifically have, please tell me I still have sound. Okay. Is there a chance that there will be enclaves that specifically volunteer or forcibly send members of their own communities to have exchanges to switch out genetic materials as well? Genetic material people, like, listen, okay, you 1,000 people of our 10 million strong habitat, you're going to have to go to this other hab and we're going to bring in genetic exchanging, so that we can keep going on. And maybe some people are like, yeah, I'll do that. Well, what am I going to be there? 1,000 years? That's not a big deal. I'll be back, you know? Yeah. And then Rickard says, well, we wouldn't need to be the same. We could engineer vastly different shells for ourselves. I agree. Although you could also make the claim that even if we all have vastly different shells, they would all be vastly different shells of the same different shells for eternity. Unless, of course, again, if we're digital information, those shells could then be changed and modified as we wish, right? But would we do that through like an AI? Would an AI just say, well, we're coming upon the 30-day mark, we're going to have to do some scrubbing? Or would people culturally do it and embrace it and go, hey, it's been 1,000 years, time for us to switch out our bodies or something? I mean, I could imagine any combination of those. Ricker says, add to that retroviruses and such, and diversity wouldn't be a problem. Now, it's a possibility that the current population, it wouldn't be a problem, but visitors, it could be a problem for them, especially if many of these viruses, like if the current population is immune to those viruses, or at least carrying those viruses but are immune, visitors might be highly susceptible to them. And that could make people very insular as well. There's the in present day, there is a risk that we as explorers to other worlds and planets may bring with us our own bacteria, which could infect where we're going. Now, mind you, we don't have the technology to go to Alpha Centauri and other places, but there is a fear that no matter how pure, we still might be infecting something else. Yeah. Plur says, quote, your immune system is out of date. Please connect to the internet to get the latest updates and ensure you're protected. Yeah, exactly. Very much so. As a matter of fact, the Gross Mitchell or Gross Michael banana or Mickle bananas. Yeah, I've heard that a lot of the fruits and vegetables we eat today aren't actually the fruits and vegetables that they were derived from, because the original ones died out or something. There are a bunch of other pronouns, but they're just not used in common parlance, like they and zir. Yeah, I agree. I think some of those might make a return, especially given that at some point, if and when we are able to choose not only what we desire, but our physical bodies and what we look like, that we may pick pronouns that are like double-sided. Like I'm picking one that shows what I physically am, and then I'm picking one that represents my desires and putting the two together. I could see that. I think that would probably be an easy thing to do. Although you would have to categorize, I guess you could categorize it by physical traits, but see, that even that gets a little complicated too. I mean, you know, I don't know, that maybe that's wrong of me. So whatever. Anyway, guys, we went down a deep end. We didn't really talk too much gaming stuff, but thank you very much for sticking with me for this. Tomorrow's World Building Wednesday. Not that we haven't been world building yesterday and today, but tomorrow's World Building Wednesday. Please join me for that. Everyone out there, have a great day. Thank you. Bye.